The emergency klaxons screamed through the corridors of the ISS Meridian like dying metal birds, their piercing wails bouncing off titanium walls that had witnessed 3 decades of deep space missions. Lieutenant Commander Vera Chen pressed, her back against the cold bulkhead, feeling the ship's artificial gravity generators struggling against the violent tremors that shook the massive vessel. Through the reinforced porthole beside her, the orange glow of planetary atmosphere painted her angular face in shades of fire and shadow. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. All hands to emergency stations. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. The voice crackling through the comm system belonged to Admiral Marcus Thorne, whose gravelly tone carried the authority of 40 years, commanding Earth's most prestigious deep space fleet. Even through the static, his disappointment was palpable. As he added, navigation error has put us in a decaying orbit around Kepler 442b. We have approximately 4 hours before atmospheric entry becomes irreversible. Vera's fingers found the worn leather compass that hung from a chain around her neck, a relic from her grandmother, who had navigated Earth's oceans long before humans reached for the stars. The antique brass felt warm against her palm, its needle spinning wildly in the electromagnetic chaos that surrounded their failing ship. She had carried it through 7 years of service, through 3 commendations for exceptional piloting, through countless nights when the darkness between stars felt too vast to comprehend. The corridor erupted in controlled chaos as crew members rushed past her, their boots thundering against the metal grating. Among them, she spotted Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez, his weathered face set in grim determination as he barked orders to a group of junior technicians. Rodriguez had served with her father during the Mars Colonial War, and his presence on the Rodriguez had served with her father during the Mars Colonial War, and his presence on the Phazans Meridian had been one of the few comforts during her assignment to this prestigious but unforgiving vessel. "Chun!" The voice cut through the noise like a blade. Commander Sarah Mitchell appeared through the smoke-hazed corridor, her usually pristine uniform torn at the shoulder, revealing a nasty gash that painted her sleeve crimson. Mitchell had been Vera's mentor since her arrival on the Meridian 18 months ago, the only senior officer who seemed to see potential where others saw weakness. "The Admiral wants to see you in the bridge immediately." Something about alternative navigation protocols. Vera nodded, pushing herself away from the wall with practiced grace despite the ship's erratic movements. The Meridian groaned around them, its hull plates expanding and contracting with each atmospheric pressure wave that reached up from the planet below. She had studied Kepler 442b during her time at the Academy, a world of perpetual storms and electromagnetic anomalies that made it a graveyard for ships that ventured too close. The planet's unique magnetic field created navigation dead zones that could turn the most advanced vessels into flying coffins. "Rodriguez," she called out as she moved through the corridor, catching the chief's attention. His eyes, lined with decades of service, found hers with the kind of recognition that transcended rank. "How bad is it really?" The older man glanced around, ensuring their conversation remained private amid the chaos. "Navigation arrays completely fried, Lieutenant Commander. Whatever hit us out there, solar flare, electromagnetic pulse, something worse, it's left us flying blind." The Admiral ... double quotes, he paused, his expression darkening. "The Admiral is looking for someone to blame. And you know what that means." Vera did know. For the past 18 months, every mistake, every minor system failure, every delay in routine operations had somehow found its way back to her service record. Admiral Thorne had made his opinion of her clear. From the moment she stepped aboard his ship, she was a political appointment, a diversity hire, a stain on the proud tradition of deep space. Command. The fact that she had graduated 3rd in her class from the Academy, that she held advanced certifications in theoretical navigation and emergency piloting, that she had literally written portions of the manual on navigating electromagnetic anomalies. None of that mattered to a man who saw her presence as an insult to his authority. The bridge doors hissed open as she approached, revealing the controlled pandemonium of the ship's nerve center. Officers hunched over darkened consoles, their faces illuminated only by the red emergency lighting that bathed everything in an ominous glow. The main view screen showed the swirling, toxic atmosphere of Kepler 442b growing larger with each passing minute, its storms crackling with electrical discharge that painted the planet's surface in networks of purple and gold. Lightning. Admiral Thorne stood at the center of it all, his imposing frame somehow managing to project authority even as his ship fell towards certain destruction. His gray hair was perfectly maintained despite the crisis, his uniform immaculate except for the thin line of sweat that traced his temple. When he turned to face Vera, his eyes held the cold fury of a man whose perfect record was about to be permanently tarnished. "Lieutenant Commander Chen," he said, her name dripping with disdain, "I understand you have some theories about navigating electromagnetic anomalies. Theories that apparently qualify you to serve aboard my ship, despite your questionable track record." The bridge fell silent except for the constant hum of failing systems and the distant rumble of the planet's gravitational pull. Every officer present knew the subtext of the Admiral's words, the careful way he avoided direct accusations while making his feelings perfectly clear. Vera had heard it all before: the whispered conversations about her rapid promotion, the speculation about her family connections, the suggestion that her achievements were somehow unearned. "Sir," she replied, keeping her voice steady despite the anger that burned in her chest, "I've been analyzing the electromagnetic patterns from Kepler 442b for the past 14 hours. There are brief moments when the field distortions create navigational corridors. If we can time our engine burns precisely, we might be able to use the planet's own magnetic anomalies to slingshot us back to safe distance." Commander Mitchell stepped forward, her injured arm cradled against her chest. "Admiral, Lieutenant, Commander Chen's research into theoretical navigation has been exceptional. Her paper on gravitational resonance in electromagnetically hostile environments was published in the Journal of Deep Space Navigation just last year." Thorne's laugh was harsh and humorless. "Published papers don't pilot ships, Commander Mitchell. And theoretical knowledge doesn't replace practical experience." His gaze fixed on Vera with the intensity of a weapons targeting system. "Tell me, Lieutenant Commander, how many ships have you actually navigated through electromagnetic storms? How many times have you put your theories to the test when lives were on the line?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. Vera felt the weight of every eye on the bridge, felt the familiar burn of humiliation that had become her constant companion aboard the Meridian. She thought of her grandmother's compass, still warm against her chest, and the stories of navigation by instinct and intuition that had guided her family for generations. "This would be my first time, sir," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But the mathematics are sound. The patterns I've identified show a 73% probability of successful escape if we execute the maneuver within the next 2 hours and 17 minutes. 73%, Thorne repeated, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "How reassuring. And what happens to the 27% chance that your mathematics are wrong? What happens when your theories collide with reality and my ship burns up in that planet's atmosphere?" Chief Rodriguez appeared at Vera's shoulder, his presence offering silent support. "Admiral, with respect, our current trajectory gives us 0% chance of survival. Lieutenant Commander Chen's plan might be untested, but it's the only option we have." The Admiral's eyes blazed with fury as he turned on Rodriguez. "Chief, I don't recall asking for your opinion on navigation protocols. Perhaps you'd prefer to return to your duties in engineering instead of second-guessing command decisions. The bridge trembled again, more violently this time, and the artificial gravity flickered for a terrifying moment before stabilizing. Through the main viewscreen, Kepler 442b filled more of their view, its storm systems clearly visible now as massive cyclones that dwarfed entire continents. The planet's electromagnetic field was beginning to interfere with their remaining systems, causing displays to flicker and power fluctuations to ripple through the ship. "Sir," came a voice from the navigation console. Ensign Torres, barely 22 years old and fresh from the academy, looked up from her displays with barely controlled panic. "We're losing attitude control. The electromagnetic interference is affecting our stabilizers. At current rate of decay, we'll enter the planet's thermosphere in 3 hours and 41 minutes. Vera watched the Admiral's face as the reality of their situation finally penetrated his pride. For a moment, just a moment, she saw fear frost his features before the mask of command reasserted itself. He was a decorated officer, a hero of 3 interplanetary conflicts, a man whose name was spoken with reverence in academy halls. But for all his experience, he had never faced anything like this. "Very well," he said finally, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. "Lieutenant Commander Chen, you have 2 hours to prove your theories aren't worth less than the paper they're printed on. But understand this: when your plan fails, when this ship and its crew are lost because I trusted the calculations of an unproven officer, that failure will be yours and yours alone." The words hit Vera like physical blows, each syllable designed to wound and diminish. Around the bridge, she could see the reactions of her fellow officers, some embarrassed by the Admiral's public humiliation of a subordinate, others nodding in quiet agreement with his assessment. She felt the familiar urge to shrink back, to apologize for taking up space, to find some way to make herself smaller and less threatening to the established order. Instead, she straightened her shoulders and met the Admiral's gaze directly. "Understood. Sir, I'll need access to the auxiliary navigation computers and permission to implement a modified flight path immediately." "Granted," Thorne said curtly. "Commander Mitchell, you'll oversee the lieutenant commander's experiment. I want detailed records of every decision, every calculation, every moment of this debacle, so that the inquiry board will have a complete picture of how the Meridian was lost." As the Admiral stalked off the bridge, leaving behind a wake of tension and unspoken recriminations, Vera felt the compass against her chest pulse with warmth. She thought of her grandmother, navigating by stars and intuition across Earth's vast oceans, trusting in tools that seemed primitive by modern standards, but had guided humanity safely for millennia. The next 2 hours would determine not just the fate of the Meridian and its crew, but her own place in the history of deep space exploration. She could succeed and prove her worth to a fleet that had never truly accepted her, or she could fail and become a cautionary tale about the dangers of political correctness in military command. Either way, there would be no hiding anymore. The ghost that Admiral Thorne had tried so hard to ignore was about to become very real indeed. The auxiliary navigation bay hummed with the quiet efficiency of secondary systems, its smaller displays casting pale blue light across Vera's concentrated features. She had commandeered the space 2 hours after the Admiral's ultimatum, transforming the cramped compartment into a makeshift command center filled with holographic projections of Kepler 442b's electromagnetic field patterns. Her fingers danced across the interface with practiced precision, each calculation building upon the last in an intricate web of mathematical possibility. Commander Mitchell sat nearby, her injured arm now properly bandaged by the ship's medical officer, watching Vera work with a mixture of admiration and concern. The older woman had seen brilliance before, had served alongside some of the finest navigators in the fleet, but there was something different about the way Vera approached problems. something that transcended mere technical skill. "Tell me about your grandmother's compass," Mitchell said quietly, breaking the silence that had stretched between them for nearly an hour. Vera's hands paused over the controls, her eyes finding the antique instrument that still hung around her neck. She was a marine navigator during the climate wars, when half of Earth's GPS satellites were knocked out by solar storms. She used to tell stories about sailing through hurricanes by reading the stars, about finding safe harbor when all the electronic instruments had failed. Her fingers traced the compass's worn brass surface. She said that navigation was part science, part art, and part faith, that the universe had patterns within patterns, and if you learned to listen to them, they would always guide you home. "And you believe that?" Mitchell asked, though her tone carried no judgment, only curiosity. "I used to think it was just romantic nostalgia," Vera admitted, turning back to her calculations. "Ancient superstition in an age of quantum computers and artificial intelligence. But the more I study electromagnetic anomalies, the more I see what she meant. There are rhythms in chaos, melodies in the static. You just have to know how to listen." The display in front of her showed Kepler 442b in cross-section, its magnetic field lines twisted into complex spirals by the planet's unusual geology. Most navigators would see only chaos, a deadly maze of electromagnetic interference that had claimed 17 ships over the past decade. But Vera saw something else, a pattern that repeated every 2.7 hours. Windows of relative stability that opened and closed like breathing. Her personal log from the academy days came flooding back late nights in the navigation lab, running simulation after simulation while her classmates attended social events or caught up on sleep. Professor Yamamoto had called her obsessive, had warned her that theoretical perfection meant nothing without practical application. But Vera had persisted, driven by something she couldn't quite name, a hunger to understand the hidden mathematics that governed the movement of ships through space. The irony wasn't lost on her, that those same qualities that had made her professors uncomfortable, her intensity, her unwillingness to accept conventional wisdom, her tendency to see patterns, where others saw randomness, were exactly what the Meridian needed now. The Admiral saw her as a liability, a weakness in his perfectly ordered command structure. He couldn't understand that her different perspective wasn't a bug in the system, it was a feature. "I never wanted to be the first anything," she said. Suddenly, her voice barely audible above the hum of the computers. "I just wanted to be good at my job. But from the moment I walked into the academy, I was the Asian girl in navigation, the diversity admission, the one who probably had help with her entrance exams." Her laugh was bitter and tired. "Do you know what it's like to have your every achievement questioned? To wonder if people respect you or just tolerate you because they have to?" Mitchell leaned forward, her expression serious. "Vera, I've read your file. Your real file, not the sanitized version that gets passed around at senior staff meetings. Your scores at the academy were exceptional, not just good, but groundbreaking. Your thesis on multidimensional navigation theory is required reading for advanced students now. Admiral Thorne knows that, even if he won't admit it." "Then why?" Vera began, but Mitchell cut her off with a raised hand. "Because you scare him," she said simply. "You represent change, evolution, a future where command isn't automatically handed to people who look like him and think like him. Your presence on his bridge is a reminder that the fleet is moving beyond the old boy's network, whether he likes it or not." The ship shuddered again, reminding them both of their precarious situation. On the main display, Kepler 442b loomed. Larger, its atmosphere beginning to create visible friction against the Meridian's hull. They had 93 minutes before the point of no return. 93 minutes before the planet's gravity well became inescapable. Vera pulled up her personal files, scrolling through years of performance reviews and efficiency reports. The pattern was clear once you knew how to look for it. every minor mistake magnified, every success attributed to luck or favorable circumstances, every recommendation hedged with subtle warnings about her unconventional approach and theoretical focus. It was death by 1,000 cuts, a systematic campaign to undermine her confidence and limit her advancement. She thought about her parents, both brilliant engineers who had immigrated to Luna City in the 2090s with nothing but their education and an unshakable belief in their daughter's potential. They had sacrificed everything to give her opportunities they never had, working double shifts in the atmospheric processors to pay for her academy tuition. The pride in her father's eyes when she received her commission, the tears of joy from her mother when she was assigned to the Meridian. Would all of that be for nothing? "There's something else," she said, pulling up a classified section of her personnel file. "Something the Admiral doesn't know I know." Her fingers hesitated over the controls, then activated a secure partition that required her personal authorization. Codes. 3 years ago, during the Centauri Crisis, Admiral Thorne's flagship was caught in a similar electromagnetic anomaly near Proxima Centauri b. They lost 17 crew members and barely escaped with their lives. Mitchell's eyes widened as she read the classified report. He was reprimanded for failing to follow established navigation protocols. His career was nearly ended because he ignored warnings from his navigation officer, a young lieutenant who had theorized a safe passage through the anomaly field. "Lieutenant Vera Chen," Vera said quietly. "My cousin. She resigned from the fleet 6 months later, said she couldn't serve in an organization that valued pride over prudent caution. The Admiral has been fighting that ghost ever since, trying to prove that experience matters more than theoretical knowledge, that the old ways are still the best ways." The revelation hung between them like a bridge, connecting past and present, explaining the depth of Thorne's hostility toward anyone who reminded him of his greatest failure. Vera's presence on the bridge wasn't just professionally threatening, it was personally devastating. A daily reminder of the moment when his pride had cost lives and nearly destroyed his career. "No wonder he hates me," Vera whispered, pieces of the puzzle finally falling into place. "Every time he looks at me, he sees her. Every time I suggest an alternative approach, he hears her warnings that he ignored. I'm not just challenging his authority, I'm reopening the worst wound of his career." The chronometer showed 87 minutes remaining. On the tactical display, Vera could see the first traces of atmospheric interaction with their hull, the beginning of the heating process that would eventually tear the Meridian apart if they couldn't escape Kepler 442b's gravitational embrace. She thought about the 847 souls aboard the ship, each one trusting that their officers would find a way to bring them home safely. Her grandmother's compass grew warm against her chest, its ancient needle somehow finding true north even in the electromagnetic chaos that surrounded them. For a moment, Vera could almost hear the old woman's voice, speaking across the years with words of wisdom earned through decades of navigating treacherous seas. "Trust the patterns, little star," she had always said, using the pet name that made young Vera feel special and loved. "Trust the mathematics, trust your instincts, and trust yourself. The universe is vast and strange, but it follows rules. Learn the rules, and you can dance with the stars." Vera's hands moved across the controls with renewed purpose, inputting variables and constraints that would determine their survival. The calculations were staggeringly complex, requiring her to account for gravitational fields, electromagnetic interference, atmospheric density, and a dozen other factors that changed by the second. But beneath the complexity, she could see the elegant simplicity of the solution, a spiral path that would use the planet's own magnetic field as a gravitational slingshot, accelerating them away from danger instead of deeper into it. The plan would require perfect timing, split-second precision, and a level of trust between pilot and navigator that went beyond mere professional cooperation. One mistake, one miscalculation, one moment of hesitation, and the Meridian would become another ghost ship lost to the void. But as Vera finalized her calculations and prepared to present them to Admiral Thorne, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Confidence. Not the false bravado of someone trying to prove themselves, but the quiet certainty of someone who knew they were exactly where they needed to be, doing exactly what they were born to do. The compass pulsed warm against her chest one final time. And Vera Chen smiled. The bridge erupted into controlled chaos as Admiral Thorne reviewed Vera's navigation plan, his weathered features growing darker with each passing second. The holographic display showed the proposed flight path in brilliant blue lines, a complex spiral that would take the Meridian dangerously close to Kepler 442b's upper atmosphere before using the planet's electromagnetic field to catapult them to safety. "This is madness," he said finally, his voice cutting through the ambient noise of failing systems. "You're asking me to fly directly into the planet's magnetosphere, through the exact electromagnetic storm that disabled our navigation in the first place. It's suicide disguised as science." Vera stood at attention beside the display, her uniform crisp despite the hours of intense calculation, her voice steady as she defended her work. "Sir, the magnetosphere is precisely what makes this possible. By entering the field at a specific vector and velocity, we can use the planet's own magnetic forces to accelerate us beyond escape velocity. It's counterintuitive, but the mathematics are sound." "Mathematics?" Thorne spat the word like it left a bitter taste in his mouth. "Lieutenant Commander, I've been navigating hostile space for longer than you've been alive. I've seen brilliant theories crumble the moment they encounter the chaos of real combat conditions. What you're proposing isn't navigation, it's an elaborate form of suicide." Around the bridge, the senior staff watched the confrontation with barely concealed anxiety. Everyone knew about the Admiral's history with unconventional navigation theories, though few understood the personal demons that drove his resistance to Vera's plan. Chief Rodriguez stood near the engineering console, his experienced eyes moving between the tactical displays, and the two officers locked in their battle of wills. "Admiral," Commander Mitchell interjected carefully, "Lieutenant Commander Chen's plan does offer our only real chance of escape. Our current trajectory gives us perhaps 40 minutes before we reach the point of no return. Even if we don't fully trust the theory, shouldn't we at least consider—" "Consider what?" Thorne's voice rose, his composure finally cracking under the pressure of command and the weight of his own past failures. "Consider gambling the lives of 847 souls on the untested theories of an officer who has never commanded so much as a shuttle in combat conditions. Consider throwing away 4 decades of hard-won experience because a computer model suggests we can perform a miracle." The accusation hung in the air like poison gas, seeping into every corner of the bridge and leaving a trail of uncomfortable silence in its wake. Vera felt the familiar burn of humiliation, the sensation of being reduced to nothing more than her inexperience and presumed inadequacy. But this time, something was different. This time, the lives of her crewmates hung in the balance, and personal feelings were a luxury she couldn't afford. "With respect, Admiral," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word, "experience without adaptation is just repeated failure. The electromagnetic anomaly we're facing is unprecedented in fleet records. Conventional navigation protocols have no answer for our situation because no ship has ever escaped from a similar predicament using conventional methods." Thorne's face flushed red with anger. "Are you suggesting, Lieutenant Commander, that 40 years of service have taught me nothing? That my experience is worthless compared to your theoretical models?" "I'm suggesting," Vera replied, meeting his gaze directly, "that sometimes the answer isn't found in what we've done before, but in what we're willing to do differently. The Centauri Crisis taught us that pride can be more dangerous than any enemy weapon." Sometimes the most experienced choice is knowing when experience isn't enough. The reference to the Centauri Crisis struck the bridge like a physical blow. Every senior officer present knew about the incident, though few dared to mention it in the Admiral's presence. Thorne's face went pale, then flushed again with a fury so intense that several nearby officers instinctively stepped back. "How dare you?" he whispered, his voice carrying more menace than any shout could have managed. "How dare you reference a classified incident to advance your own reckless agenda? You know nothing about the Centauri Crisis, nothing about the impossible. Choices that real commanders face when theoretical knowledge collides with practical reality." Vera felt the moment crystallizing around her like ice forming on a window. She could back down, apologize for overstepping her bounds, and accept whatever punishment the Admiral chose to inflict. Or she could push forward, risking everything, on the belief that truth mattered more than hierarchy, that the crew deserved better than comfortable lies. "I know that Lieutenant Vera Chen warned about electromagnetic anomalies around Proxima Centauri b," she said quietly. "I know that her warnings were dismissed because they contradicted established protocols. I know that 17 people died because pride was valued more than prudent caution. And I know that my cousin resigned from the fleet because she couldn't serve in an organization that punished officers for being right at inconvenient times." The revelation sent shockwaves through the bridge crew. Several officers exchanged glances, pieces of a long-hidden puzzle finally falling into place. "Chief." Rodriguez nodded slowly, his expression grim with understanding. Commander Mitchell looked between Vera and the Admiral, her tactical mind already calculating the implications of this family connection. Admiral Thorne stood frozen for a long moment, his carefully maintained composure cracking like glass under pressure. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely controlled, each word carefully measured to avoid revealing the depth of his personal pain. "Your cousin," he said slowly, "was a brilliant officer who forgot that command requires more than mathematical precision. She forgot that a captain's first duty is to his crew, not to prove the elegance of his theories. I made the best decision I could with the information available, and I've lived with the consequences every day since." "Have you?" Vera asked, and her voice carried not accusation but genuine curiosity. "Have you lived with the consequences, or have you been running from them? Because from where I stand, it looks like you've spent the last 3 years making sure that no officer like my cousin ever gets the chance to challenge your authority again. How many innovative solutions have been dismissed? How many lives could have been saved if you'd been willing to listen to voices that didn't echo your own?" The bridge fell silent except for the steady countdown of their destruction. On the main display, Kepler 442b continued to grow, its swirling storms now visible as individual cyclonic systems that dwarfed entire continents. The electromagnetic interference was becoming more severe, causing intermittent failures in their remaining navigation systems and making their situation more desperate with each passing minute. Ensign Torres looked up from her console with barely controlled panic. "Admiral, we're now at 34 minutes to point of no return. Hull temperature is beginning to rise due to atmospheric friction. If we're going to attempt any course correction, it has to be soon." The weight of command settled on Thorne's shoulders like a lead blanket. Around him, his carefully ordered world was crumbling, challenged not by enemy action or equipment failure, but by the most dangerous force in the universe, the possibility that he might be wrong. His eyes found the tactical display, confirming what his experience already told him: they were running out of time and options. "Chief Rodriguez," he said finally, his voice hollow with defeat, "what's your assessment of our propulsion systems? Can the engines handle the stress of Lieutenant Commander Chen's proposed maneuver?" Rodriguez consulted his displays before answering. "The magnetic fields will put significant strain on our electromagnetic systems, but the engines should hold together for a single pass." If the Lieutenant Commander's calculations are correct, we'll either make it out clean or be destroyed quickly. There won't be time for a second attempt. Commander Mitchell, Thorne continued, turning to his executive officer, your assessment of crew readiness for emergency maneuvers? Mitchell straightened, her voice crisp with professional efficiency despite her injuries. All departments report ready for emergency protocols. Damage control teams are standing by, medical is prepared for potential casualties, and life support systems are operating within normal parameters. The crew is trained for this, Admiral. They trust their officers to make the right decision. The implicit challenge in her words wasn't lost on anyone present. The crew trusted their officers, all their officers, not just those with 4 decades of experience. They deserved leaders who could adapt, who could set aside personal demons for the greater good, who could recognize brilliance regardless of its source. Vera watched the Admiral wrestle with his decision, seeing the internal battle reflected in his weathered features. She thought about her grandmother's compass, warm against her chest, and the generations of navigators who had trusted their instruments and intuition to guide them through impossible situations. Sometimes courage wasn't about charging into battle sometimes. It was about admitting that someone else might have the answer you needed. Sir, she said softly, I understand your reservations about my plan. I understand the weight of command and the terrible burden of making decisions that affect hundreds of lives. But right now, my theoretical knowledge is the only thing standing between this crew and certain death. I'm not asking you to trust me because I'm brilliant or experienced or worthy. I'm asking you to trust me because I'm the only option you have left. The chronometer showed 31 minutes remaining. On the engineering displays, warning lights began to flash as the ship's hull heating reached critical thresholds. In 31 minutes, the Meridian would either be free of Kepler 442b's deadly embrace or scattered across the planet's upper atmosphere as superheated debris. Admiral Thorne closed his eyes, and for a moment, he looked every one of his 63 years. When he opened them again, something had changed, not acceptance, exactly, but a kind of weary recognition that the universe had brought him full circle to face his greatest fear one more time. Very well, Lieutenant Commander Chen, he said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority despite its quiet tone. You have command of this navigation sequence. God help us all, you have command. Running word count, 6,242 words. Next 27 minutes unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance between mathematics and madness. Vera took her position at the primary navigation console, her hands moving across the controls with the fluid precision of a concert pianist. Around her, the bridge crew prepared for what would either be their salvation or their spectacular destruction. All hands, this is the Admiral. Thorne's voice echoed through the ship's communication system. We are about to attempt an emergency navigation maneuver through hostile electromagnetic conditions. All crew members are to secure themselves at emergency stations and prepare for extreme gravitational stress. This maneuver is unconventional but represents our best chance for survival. Admiral out. The understatement would have been laughable under different circumstances. Vera's plan called for the Meridian to dive directly into Kepler 442b's magnetosphere at precisely the moment when the planet's electromagnetic field reached peak intensity. They would have exactly 43 seconds to navigate through the most dangerous region of space, this side of a black hole's event horizon, using gravitational and magnetic forces that could crush their ship like an empty beverage container. Beginning initial descent vector, Vera announced, her voice carrying across the bridge with calm authority that belied her racing heart. All departments report status. Engineering reports ready, came Chief Rodriguez's voice through the comm. All systems showing green, though I won't guarantee they'll stay that way once we hit those magnetic fields. Tactical standing by, reported Lieutenant Commander Hayes from the weapons console. Point defense systems online in case we encounter debris. Medical ready for emergency casualties. Dr. Patel's voice carried the professional calm of someone who had spent 20 years treating injuries in crisis situations. Surgical bay prepared, trauma team standing by. Vera felt the familiar weight of her grandmother's compass against her chest as she initiated the first course correction. The Meridian's massive engines responded smoothly, their electromagnetic fields creating subtle vibrations that she could feel through the deck plates. On the navigation display, their trajectory shifted from a gentle curve toward inevitable destruction to a steep dive that would take them within 200 kilometers of Kepler 442b's upper atmosphere. Electromagnetic interference increasing, reported Ensign Torres from the sensor station. I'm reading massive field fluctuations ahead. Some of these storm systems are generating energy discharges equivalent to stellar flares. Stay with me, Torres, Vera said without taking her eyes off the navigation controls. I need constant updates on field density and storm front movement. The timing has to be perfect, or we're all going to become part of this planet's magnetic field permanently. The ship began to shake as they descended deeper into the planet's electromagnetic envelope. Warning lights flashed across every console as systems struggled to cope with the increasing interference. The artificial gravity fluctuated, causing loose objects to float briefly before crashing back down. Through the main view screen, Kepler 442b filled their entire field of vision, its storm systems crackling with electrical discharge that painted the planet's surface in brilliant networks of gold and purple lightning. Hull temperature rising. Chief Rodriguez reported from engineering. We're starting to get some atmospheric friction, but the thermal shielding is holding for now. Admiral Thorne stood behind Vera's console, his hands clasped tightly behind his back, watching her work with the intensity of a man staring at his own mortality. Despite his public opposition to her plan, despite years of professional animosity, he found himself oddly comforted by her calm competence under pressure. There was something in the way she moved, the quiet confidence of her voice, that reminded him of another young navigator who had tried to save his ship and crew so many years ago. 22 minutes to point of no return, Torres announced. Magnetic field strength increasing exponentially. I'm reading some kind of resonance pattern in the electromagnetic spectrum. That's the window opening, Vera said, her fingers dancing across the controls as she made minute adjustments to their approach vector. The planet's magnetic field oscillates in a complex pattern every 2.7 hours. We're approaching the peak intensity phase, which creates a brief corridor of stable electromagnetic conditions. Define brief, Admiral Thorne said quietly. 43 seconds, Vera replied without hesitation. 43 seconds when the magnetic field alignment will allow us to use gravitational slingshot effect without being torn apart by electromagnetic shear forces. Miss the window by even 5 seconds, and we'll be scattered across half the system. The Meridian groaned around them as they descended deeper into the planet's envelope. External sensors began failing one by one as the electromagnetic interference reached critical levels. The main view screen flickered and distorted, showing brief glimpses of the roiling atmosphere below before dissolving into static. They were flying blind now, trusting entirely in Vera's calculations and the ship's internal navigation systems. 15 minutes to point of no return, Torres called out, her voice tight with controlled fear. Hull temperature approaching critical thresholds, atmospheric density increasing rapidly. Vera checked her calculations one final time, cross-referencing the sensor data with her theoretical models. Everything had to be perfect trajectory, velocity, timing, and most importantly, trust. She thought of her grandmother navigating by starlight through Earth's worst storms, guided by instruments that seemed primitive by modern standards, but had never failed when life hung in the balance. "Admiral," she said, turning to face Thorne directly, I need you to know that what we're about to do has never been attempted before. The theory is sound, the mathematics are correct, but theory and reality don't always align perfectly. If something goes wrong, Thorne interrupted, his voice carrying a weight of hard-won wisdom, it won't be because you weren't prepared. It won't be because you didn't have the courage to try. Lieutenant Commander, I may have doubts about your plan, but I have none about your dedication to this crew. The admission hung in the air between them like a bridge across years of misunderstanding and mutual distrust. Around the bridge, officers who had witnessed months of barely concealed animosity between their commanding officer and navigation specialist suddenly saw something different, not agreement. Exactly, but respect born from shared responsibility and mutual recognition of each other's commitment to duty. 10 minutes to point of no return, Torres announced. Magnetic field resonance pattern beginning to stabilize. I'm reading the formation of what might be Lieutenant Commander Chen's electromagnetic corridor. Vera's hands moved across the navigation controls with increasing urgency as she prepared for the most critical phase of the maneuver. The Meridian would have to execute a series of precisely timed course corrections while traveling at tremendous velocity through one of the most hostile environments in known space. One miscalculation, one system failure, one moment of hesitation, and 847 people would pay the ultimate price for her theoretical brilliance. The ship shuddered violently as they encountered the first major electromagnetic storm front. Power fluctuations rippled through every system, causing lights to flicker and displays to temporarily scramble. The artificial gravity wavered again, this time for nearly 10 seconds, long enough for loose equipment to float in. 0 G before crashing back down with bone-jarring force. Engineering reports multiple system overloads. Chief Rodriguez's voice crackled through the COM system. Electromagnetic shielding is holding, but we're pushing every component beyond design specifications. I can't guarantee how long the engines will maintain coherent field generation in this interference. They just need to hold together for another 8 minutes. Vera replied, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. After that, we'll either be free of the interference or none of this will matter anymore. The main view screen cleared momentarily, revealing the awesome sight of Kepler 442b's upper atmosphere rushing toward them at impossible speed. Massive storm systems stretched across the planet's surface like living things, their electrical discharges creating aurora displays that would have been breathtakingly beautiful under different circumstances. The Meridian was now deep enough in the planet's gravity, while that escape using conventional methods was impossible. They were committed to Vera's plan whether it worked or not. 5 minutes to point of no return, Torres called out, her voice barely audible above the ship's protests. Electromagnetic corridor beginning to form. Field stability improving marginally. Admiral Thorne watched Vera work, noting the way she seemed to anticipate the ship's responses, making adjustments based on intuition as much as instrumentation. There was something almost mystical about her connection to the navigation systems, as if she could feel the Meridian's movement through space in ways that transcended mere technical proficiency. It reminded him uncomfortably of another young navigator who had possessed that same intuitive gift, who had tried desperately to save his ship and crew while he let pride override prudent caution. "Lieutenant Commander," he said quietly, stepping closer to her console. "Sarah would be proud of what you're attempting here." She always believed that navigation was as much art as science, that the best solutions came from understanding the universe's hidden patterns rather than simply following established procedures. Vera's hands paused for just a moment over the controls. "She taught me that, actually. During family gatherings, she would tell stories about navigating through impossible situations, about trusting your instincts even when the instruments disagreed. I always thought they were just stories until I started studying electromagnetic anomalies myself. They weren't stories, Thorne said, his voice heavy with regret. They were lessons. Lessons I was too proud and stubborn to hear when they might have saved lives. The chronometer showed 3 minutes remaining. On every display, warning indicators flashed red as the Meridian system struggled to cope with the increasing electromagnetic stress. The ship's hull was now hot enough to glow cherry red in visible light, its thermal shielding radiating excess heat in spectacular displays that painted the surrounding space in brilliant colors. Beginning final approach sequence, Vera announced. All hands brace for extreme gravitational stress. This is going to get very rough very quickly. Her fingers moved across the controls in a complex pattern that she had rehearsed hundreds of times in simulation but never attempted in real-world conditions. The Meridian's engines responded with a deep thrumming that seemed to resonate through the ship's entire structure, their electromagnetic fields interacting with Kepler 442b's magnetosphere in ways that pushed both ship and planet to their operational limits. 2 minutes to corridor entry, Torres reported. Electromagnetic field alignment approaching optimal parameters. Hull temperature at 112% of maximum safe threshold. The ship bucked and rolled as gravitational forces began to take hold, pulling them deeper into the planet's embrace while simultaneously preparing to fling them back into space. Vera felt the artificial gravity fluctuate wildly as the Meridian systems fought to maintain stable environmental conditions for the crew. Several bridge officers grabbed onto their consoles for support as the deck plates vibrated with harmonic frequencies that seemed to come from the ship's very bones. 1 minute to corridor entry, Vera called out. All systems prepare for gravitational slingshot effect. This is where we find out if theory and reality are still speaking to each other. The electromagnetic corridor opened like a flower blooming. In fast forward, creating a brief tunnel of relative stability through Kepler 442b's chaotic magnetosphere. For exactly 43 seconds, the planet's magnetic field would align in a configuration that would allow them to use gravitational acceleration without being torn apart by electromagnetic shear forces. It was a window of opportunity so brief that it existed more in theoretical mathematics than practical navigation. A phenomenon that most fleet officers would have dismissed as fantasy, but Vera Chen had never been most fleet officers. Corridor entry in 10 seconds, she announced. Engines to maximum power on my mark. Mark! The Meridian's propulsion systems roared to life with a sound that transcended mere noise, becoming a physical force that pressed every person aboard against their restraints. The ship accelerated into the electromagnetic corridor at velocities that pushed the limits of both human endurance and engineering tolerances. Through the main view screen, Kepler 442b's surface rushed past in a blur of storms and lightning. The planet's gravitational field, grabbing hold of their momentum and adding its own incredible energy to their escape velocity. For 43 seconds, the Meridian danced with forces that could destroy planets, using the delicate balance between magnetic attraction and gravitational acceleration to transform certain death into impossible salvation. The ship groaned and flexed as stress forces beyond its design specifications tested every weld, every joint, every component in a trial by fire that would either prove its worthiness or scatter its remains across interplanetary space. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The Meridian burst free of Kepler 442b's magnetosphere like a cork from a bottle, its velocity now sufficient to carry them clear of the planet's gravitational influence and into the safety of open space. Behind them, the electromagnetic storms continued their eternal dance, beautiful and deadly and utterly indifferent to the small ship that had somehow threaded the needle of their mathematical precision. On the bridge, silence reigned for a long moment as officers stared at their displays in disbelief. Every system showed green. Hull temperature was dropping rapidly as they moved away from the planet's atmospheric friction. Electromagnetic interference was decreasing to manageable levels. They had not only survived, they had succeeded beyond anyone's wildest expectations. "All stations report," Admiral Thorne commanded, his voice carrying a mixture of authority and wonder. "Engineering reports all systems nominal," came Chief Rodriguez's voice, tinged with amazement. "Minor stress fractures in the hull plating, but nothing that compromises structural integrity. The engines performed flawlessly. Tactical systems operating normally," reported Lieutenant Commander Hayes. "Sensors coming back online as we clear the electromagnetic interference zone. Medical reports no casualties." Dr. Patel's voice carried obvious relief. "Some minor injuries from the gravitational stress, but nothing serious. We were very, very lucky." Admiral Thorne turned to face Vera, who was slumped over her navigation console, exhaustion and relief warring for control of her expression. A moment, he saw not the young officer who had challenged his authority and questioned his judgment, but the brilliant navigator who had just saved 847 lives through a combination of mathematical genius and sheer force of will. "Lieutenant Commander Chen," he said formally, his voice carrying across the bridge for all to hear. "Your navigation of the Kepler 442b electromagnetic anomaly was exceptional. Your theoretical knowledge, combined with practical application, under extreme pressure, has saved this ship and crew from certain destruction. I hereby recommend you for the Distinguished Service Cross and immediate promotion to full commander." The bridge erupted in spontaneous applause as officers who had witnessed something unprecedented expressed their gratitude and amazement. Vera looked up from her console, her eyes bright with unshed tears, her hand finding the compass that still hung warm against her chest. She thought of her grandmother, of her cousin Sarah, of all the navigators who had come before her and trusted in patterns that others couldn't see. "Thank you, Admiral," she said quietly. "But the real credit belongs to everyone who trusted the mathematics when common sense said to run the other way." Sometimes the most logical thing to do is embrace the impossible. As the Meridian continued its journey away from Kepler 442b and toward the safety of known space, Admiral Marcus Thorne stood on his bridge and contemplated the profound changes that a single desperate hour had wrought in his understanding of command, authority, and the dangerous necessity of listening to voices that challenged his assumptions. The ghost he had tried so hard to ignore was no longer haunting him from the shadows. She was standing right beside him, brilliant and unafraid, ready to guide them all toward a future he was finally beginning to see. The aftermath of their escape from Kepler 442b unfolded in waves of revelation that rippled through every level of the Deep Space Fleet hierarchy. Within hours of the Meridian's emergency transmission reaching Earth Central Command, Admiral Thorne found himself fielding communications from officers he hadn't spoken to in years, scientists who wanted to understand the theoretical mathematics behind their miraculous survival, and politicians who suddenly saw opportunity in what had initially appeared to be disaster. Commander Vera Chen, her promotion had been approved and implemented with unprecedented speed set in the ship's main conference room, surrounded by holographic displays showing detailed sensor logs of their passage through the electromagnetic anomaly. Fleet analysts had been poring over the data for 3 days, trying to understand how a maneuver that should have been impossible had not only succeeded, but done so with such elegant precision that it was already being studied as a textbook example of innovative navigation theory. "The energy readings are extraordinary," Dr. Elena Vasquez from the Theoretical Physics Division said, her image flickering slightly due to the quantum entanglement communication lag between the Meridian and Earth. "Commander Chen, the mathematical models you developed show a level of sophistication that frankly surpasses most of our advanced research programs. How long did it take you to develop these calculations?" Vera looked uncomfortable with the attention, her fingers unconsciously finding the compass that had become something of a talisman for the entire crew. "Actually, Dr. Vasquez, I've been working on electromagnetic navigation theory since my second year at the Academy. My thesis advisor, Professor Yamamoto, thought the applications were too theoretical to have practical value. Professor Yamamoto. Admiral Thorne interjected from his position at the head of the conference table, has requested permission to revise his assessment of your work. He's also asking if you'd be willing to guest lecture at the Academy on advanced navigation theory. The irony wasn't lost on anyone present. 3 months ago, Vera had been a lieutenant commander struggling to prove her worth aboard a ship, where her commanding officer viewed her as a liability. Now she was being hailed as one of the most innovative navigators in fleet history, her techniques already being incorporated into emergency protocols across the entire Deep Space Command structure. Chief Rodriguez, who had been present at the meeting as a senior technical consultant, cleared his throat diplomatically. If I may, Admiral, I think there's something else we need to address. The way Commander Chen was treated aboard this ship before the crisis. The pattern of performance reviews, the systematic undermining of her authority, the way her contributions were consistently minimized or ignored. The room fell silent. Through the holographic connection, several Earth-based officials shifted uncomfortably as Rodriguez's words highlighted issues that went far beyond a single ship or a single officer. The systematic exclusion of voices that challenged conventional wisdom, the tendency to value experience over innovation, the subtle but pervasive bias against officers who didn't fit the traditional command profile, all of it was suddenly thrown into sharp relief by the contrast between Vera's treatment and her undeniable competence. Admiral Thorne stared at his hands for a long moment before speaking. Chief Rodriguez is correct. Commander Chen, I owe you more than just a promotion and a commendation. I owe you an apology, and more importantly, I owe you the acknowledgement that my judgment was clouded by personal issues that had nothing to do with your qualifications or performance. The confession landed like a small bomb in the conference room. Several of the Earth-based participants looked genuinely shocked. Admiral Thorne was legendary throughout the fleet for his uncompromising standards and unwillingness to admit mistakes. That he would publicly acknowledge his poor treatment of a subordinate represented a seismic shift in both his personal approach to command and the broader culture of accountability within the Deep Space Fleet. Admiral, Dr. Vasquez interjected carefully. Are you saying that Commander Chen's previous performance evaluations were inaccurate? I'm saying, Thorne replied, his voice carrying the weight of hard-won wisdom, that I allowed personal demons to interfere with my professional judgment. Commander Chen's innovations were dismissed not because they lacked merit, but because they reminded me of another young navigator whose warnings I had ignored years ago. My pride cost lives then, and it nearly cost lives again. Vera felt a strange mixture of vindication and sympathy as she watched her former tormentor grapple with truths he had spent years avoiding. The Admiral's acknowledgement of his failures felt less like victory than like watching someone finally set down a burden they had carried too long. There's something else, she said quietly, drawing the attention of everyone in the room. The techniques I used to navigate the Kepler 442b anomaly weren't entirely my own creation. They were built on foundational work done by Lieutenant Vera Chen during her analysis of the Proxima Centauri electromagnetic storms. My cousin's research, the research that was ignored during the Centauri Crisis, provided the mathematical framework that made our escape possible. The revelation sent ripples of understanding through the assembled officers and officials. Several participants began accessing classified files, cross-referencing the Centauri Crisis records with the Meridian's recent escape. The pattern that emerged was both tragic and instructive. Brilliant innovation dismissed by institutional pride, only to prove its worth when desperation finally overcame prejudice. Fleet Admiral Catherine Santos, participating from her office at Earth Central Command, leaned forward with intense interest. Commander Chen, Are you telling us that the navigation techniques that saved the Meridian were actually developed 3 years ago? By an officer who resigned from the fleet because her warnings were ignored? That's exactly what I'm telling you. Vera confirmed. Sarah's work on electromagnetic resonance patterns provided the theoretical foundation for everything I did. She deserves recognition for laying the groundwork that made our survival possible. The implications were staggering. The fleet had lost one of its most innovative officers because institutional biases had prevented proper evaluation of her contributions. How many other brilliant minds had been driven away by similar short-sightedness? How many potential solutions to complex problems had been dismissed because they challenged conventional wisdom or came from unexpected sources? Admiral Santos made notes on her personal tablet before addressing the room. This situation clearly requires a comprehensive review of our personnel evaluation procedures and our approach to innovative thinking within the command structure. Commander Chen, would you be willing to head a committee examining ways to better integrate theoretical research with practical applications? Vera felt a moment of vertigo as she contemplated the magnitude of what was being offered. 6 months ago, she had been struggling to have her voice heard during routine navigation briefings. Now she was being asked to help reshape the institutional culture of the entire deep space fleet. "I'd be honored, Admiral," she replied. "But I think the committee should include officers from diverse backgrounds and experience levels. The problems we're trying to solve won't be fixed by putting the same types of people in charge of finding solutions." Chief Rodriguez nodded approvingly. The commander has a point. Some of the best innovations come from enlisted personnel who see problems from different angles than the command structure. Any real change has to include voices from every level of the organization. The discussion continued for another hour, touching on everything from academy curriculum reform to promotion criteria revision. By the time the conference ended, Vera found herself at the center of a movement that extended far beyond her individual career advancement. She was being positioned as a symbol of institutional change, a representative of a new generation of officers who valued innovation over tradition and competence over conformity. But as the holographic connections winked out one by one, leaving her alone with Admiral Thorne in the conference room, Vera felt the weight of expectations settling on her shoulders like a lead cloak. She thought of her grandmother, who had navigated by starlight and intuition, and wondered if the old woman would have understood the complex politics of institutional reform. "It's a heavy burden," Thorne said quietly, as if reading her thoughts. "Being held up as an example, expected to represent change for an entire organization. I should know I spent 40 years being the poster child for traditional command excellence, and look how that turned out." Vera looked up at her former adversary, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time. Beneath the gruff exterior and intimidating reputation was a man who had genuinely tried to serve with honor, who had made mistakes and lived with their consequences, who was now struggling to adapt to a universe that demanded different qualities than the ones that had made him successful. "Admiral," she said carefully, "what happened during the Centauri Crisis wasn't entirely your fault. You made the best decision you could with the information you had and the institutional culture you were operating within. The problem wasn't that you were a bad officer, it was that the system didn't encourage the kind of thinking that might have prevented the tragedy." Thorne's laugh was bitter and self-aware. "That's generous, Commander, but we both know that 17 people died because I was too proud to listen to a junior officer's warnings. Good intentions and institutional culture don't bring back the dead." "No," Vera agreed, "but they can prevent future deaths. The changes we're talking about, the committee work, the cultural reforms, they're not about assigning blame for past mistakes. They're about creating an environment where the next brilliant junior officer doesn't have to watch people die because her ideas were dismissed out of hand." They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, two officers from different generations, contemplating the complexities of command and the price of wisdom earned through failure. Outside the conference room's viewport, the stars wheeled in their eternal dance, indifferent to human struggles, but somehow comforting in their constancy. "There's something I need to tell you," Thorne said finally. "Something about your cousin, Sarah, that isn't in the official records." Vera tensed, sensing that whatever he was about to reveal would change her understanding of events she thought she knew completely. After the Centauri Crisis, after the inquiry and the reprimands and the media coverage, Sarah came to see me. She wasn't angry or vindictive, she was sad. She said she was resigning not because she blamed me for what happened, but because she couldn't serve in an organization that punished officers for being right at inconvenient times. He paused, his weathered features reflecting years of regret and self-recrimination. But before she left, she gave me her complete research files on electromagnetic navigation. She said that someday, somewhere, another officer would face the same impossible choice, and when that day came, her work might save lives instead of ending careers. She made me promise to keep the research safe, to make sure it wasn't buried in classified archives where it could never help anyone. Vera felt tears welling in her eyes as understanding dawned. "You knew, when I proposed the Kepler 442b maneuver, you knew it was based on Sarah's work. I recognized the mathematical structures, yes. The theoretical framework was unmistakably hers, even though you had developed it far beyond anything she had originally conceived." Thorne met her gaze directly. "That's why I was so terrified of your plan, why I fought so hard against implementing it. I knew that if it failed, I would have ignored Sarah's warnings twice, killed people twice with the same arrogance and stupidity." The revelation recontextualized everything Vera thought she understood about the Admiral's opposition to her plan. He hadn't been dismissing her work because of prejudice or institutional bias. He had been paralyzed by the fear of repeating his greatest failure, of proving that he had learned nothing from the tragedy that had defined his career. "But you approved the maneuver anyway," she said. "Despite your fears, despite the personal cost, you trusted the mathematics and gave me command of the navigation sequence." "Because," Thorne said simply, 17 people died the last time I let pride override prudent caution. I couldn't let that happen again, no matter what it cost me personally." As the full scope of the situation became clear, Vera felt a profound shift in her understanding of command, authority, and the terrible burden of making decisions that affected other people's lives. The Admiral's behavior, which had seemed like simple prejudice or institutional bias, was revealed as something far more complex, the struggle of a good man trying to learn from his mistakes while carrying the weight of deaths he couldn't undo. 6 months after the Meridian's escape from Kepler 442b, the Deep Space Fleet had transformed in ways that would have been unimaginable during the height of Admiral Thorne's traditional command style. The Chun protocols, as they had come to be known throughout the fleet, were now standard operating procedure for electromagnetic anomaly navigation, while the broader cultural changes sparked by their crisis had rippled through every level of the military hierarchy. Commander Vera Chen stood in the Academy's main lecture hall, looking out at 200 eager faces representing the next generation of deep space officers. Her presentation on innovative navigation in crisis situations had drawn standing room-only crowds for 3 consecutive sessions, but today felt different. Today marked the official launch of the Lieutenant Vera Chen Memorial Program for Theoretical Navigation Research, an initiative that would ensure brilliant minds were nurtured rather than dismissed. "Navigation," she began, her voice carrying easily through the acoustically perfect auditorium, "has always been about more than simply getting from point A to point B. It's about understanding the hidden patterns that govern the movement of objects through space, about recognizing that the universe operates according to mathematical principles that we're only beginning to comprehend. But most importantly, It's about having the courage to trust in solutions that challenge conventional wisdom. In the front row sat Professor Yamamoto, her former thesis advisor, whose initial dismissal of her theoretical work had been publicly retracted and replaced with a formal acknowledgement of his failure to recognize revolutionary thinking. Beside him, Admiral Santos observed with the keen attention of someone evaluating the fleet's investment in institutional change. The Academy had implemented sweeping reforms to its evaluation criteria, ensuring that innovative thinking would be rewarded rather than discouraged. The maneuver that saved the Meridian wasn't my creation alone, Vera continued, advancing to a holographic display that showed Sarah's original electromagnetic field equations. It was built on groundbreaking theoretical work done by Lieutenant Vera Chen, whose research into electromagnetic resonance patterns provided the mathematical foundation that made our survival possible. Sarah's tragedy wasn't that she was wrong, it was that she was right at a time when the institution wasn't ready to hear revolutionary ideas from an unexpected source. The audience stirred as many of them grasped the full implications for the first time. The navigation techniques they would be learning, the protocols that were now saving ship throughout the fleet, had been developed by an officer who resigned because her innovations were dismissed. The lesson was clear. Brilliant minds could emerge from anywhere, and the fleet's survival might depend on its willingness to listen to voices that challenged established orthodoxy. Admiral Thorne entered the lecture hall quietly, taking a seat in the back row where his presence wouldn't distract from Vera's presentation. The past 6 months had been transformative for him as well, forcing him to confront not just his treatment of Vera, but the broader patterns of behavior that had characterized his entire career. He had requested reassignment to the Academy's Ethics and Leadership program, trading the prestige of Deep Space Command for the opportunity to help ensure that future officers learn from his mistakes. The Admiral who initially opposed my plan, Vera said, noticing his presence with a slight smile, has become one of the program's strongest advocates. Admiral Thorne's willingness to admit his errors and work toward institutional change demonstrates the kind of leadership courage that the fleet needs as we face increasingly complex challenges in deep space exploration. The acknowledgement wasn't lost on the audience, many of whom recognized Thorne's reputation as one of the fleet's most demanding and traditional commanders. That such a figure would publicly support reform efforts sent a powerful message about the depth and authenticity of the changes taking place within the organization. Chief Rodriguez, who had been promoted to senior chief and assigned as the Academy's liaison for practical navigation training, nodded approvingly from his position near the demonstration equipment. His presence ensured that the theoretical innovations being taught would be grounded in real-world applicability, bridging the gap between brilliant ideas and practical implementation that had caused so many problems in the past. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. The Chun Protocols, Vera explained, gesturing toward a complex three-dimensional model of electromagnetic field interactions, represent a fundamental shift in how we approach navigation through hostile space environments. Instead of avoiding electromagnetic anomalies, we learn to work with them, to use their energy patterns as tools for achieving previously impossible maneuvers. She walked among the student officers as she spoke, making eye contact and engaging them directly in the learning process. Many of them were younger than she was, fresh from civilian universities and technical schools, bringing diverse perspectives that had historically been filtered out by the fleet's traditional recruitment and evaluation processes. But the protocols are more than just navigation techniques, she continued. They represent a philosophy of problem-solving that values innovation over tradition, mathematical precision over institutional prejudice, and collaborative thinking over hierarchical authority. The universe doesn't care about our rank structure or our political considerations. It operates according to physical laws, that demand creative solutions. The question and answer session that followed revealed the depth of change taking place within the Academy's culture. Students asked probing questions about institutional bias, about the balance between experience and innovation, about ways to ensure that brilliant ideas weren't dismissed simply because they came from unexpected sources. The level of engagement and critical thinking would have been impossible under the old system, where questioning authority was discouraged and conformity was rewarded. After the lecture, Vera found herself surrounded by small groups of students and faculty members, all eager to discuss specific aspects of the Chun protocols or to share their own ideas for innovative approaches to deep space challenges. The energy was infectious, reminiscent of her own academy days, when the possibilities of space exploration seemed limitless, and every problem was just a puzzle waiting for the right mathematical solution. Admiral Thorne approached her as the crowd began to disperse, his expression carrying a mixture of pride and something that might have been parental affection. "Commander, I wanted you to know that I've received approval for the Vera Chen Memorial Research Grant. The fleet is providing funding for 10 full scholarships annually for officers pursuing advanced degrees in theoretical navigation and related fields." Vera felt her throat tighten with emotion. The scholarship program would ensure that future officers like her cousin wouldn't face the financial barriers that sometimes prevented brilliant minds from pursuing advanced education. More importantly, it represented institutional commitment to the idea that theoretical research was as valuable as practical experience. "Sarah would have been honored," she said quietly. She always believed that navigation was about more than just technical proficiency, that it was about understanding the universe's hidden patterns and having the courage to trust in solutions that others couldn't see. "She was right," Thorne admitted. "Just as you were right 6 months ago when you proposed a maneuver that seemed impossible to everyone except the person who had done the mathematical analysis. The fleet is stronger now because we've learned to value that kind of thinking, to create space for voices that challenge our assumptions." As the afternoon sunlight streamed through the Academy's tall windows, painting everything in shades of gold and amber, Vera reflected on the journey that had brought her from frustrated lieutenant commander to institutional reformer. The changes taking place were profound new evaluation criteria that valued innovation and diverse thinking, research programs that supported theoretical work, leadership training that emphasized the importance of listening to subordinates, and cultural shifts that made the fleet more welcoming to officers who didn't fit traditional molds. But perhaps the most significant change was in her own understanding of what it meant to be a leader. The crisis aboard the Meridian had taught her that technical competence, while necessary, wasn't sufficient for effective command. True leadership required the ability to navigate not just physical space, but also the complex human dynamics that determined whether brilliant ideas were implemented or dismissed, whether institutional change was embraced or resisted. "Commander," Sarah Mitchell approached as Vera was packing up her presentation materials. Mitchell had been promoted to captain and assigned as the Academy's Dean of Advanced Studies, putting her in position to oversee the implementation of many of the reforms that had grown out of the Meridian Crisis. "The memorial program is exceeding all expectations," Mitchell reported. "We've received applications from 300 candidates for the first 10 scholarships, including submissions from officers serving on ships throughout the fleet. The quality of the theoretical work being proposed is extraordinary." Vera smiled as she secured her grandmother's compass in its protective case. The antique instrument had become something of a legend among Academy students, a symbol of the connection between ancient navigation wisdom and cutting-edge theoretical physics. Several museums had requested permission to display it, but Vera preferred to keep it with her, a tangible reminder of the generations of navigators who had trusted their instincts and instruments to guide them through impossible situations. "Any word from Sarah?" she asked. Her cousin had been contacted about the memorial program and invited to participate as a research consultant, but had remained characteristically elusive about her plans. "Actually," Mitchell said with a knowing smile, "she's here. She arrived this morning and has been sitting in on Academy committee meetings all day. I think she's considering the consulting position, though she's being typically cautious about making commitments to the organization that once drove her away." The reunion took place in the Academy's Memorial Garden, a quiet space dedicated to officers who had given their lives in service of deep space exploration. Vera Chen looked older than her 29 years, her hair prematurely streaked with gray, but her eyes held the same fierce intelligence that had made her one of the most promising navigators of her generation. "Little cousin," she said, embracing Vera warmly, "I hear you've been causing quite a stir with my old research notes." "Your research notes saved 847 lives, Vera replied. "And they're going to save a lot more once we get the protocols fully implemented throughout the fleet. You should be proud of what you accomplished." Sarah's expression grew complex, mixing satisfaction with lingering sadness. "I'm proud of what you accomplished. You took theoretical work and made it practical, took mathematical models and turned them into life-saving procedures. That's the kind of bridge building between theory and application that the fleet desperately needed." They walked among the memorial plaques in comfortable silence, reading the names of officers who had pushed the boundaries of human knowledge and paid the ultimate price for their dedication. Many of the inscriptions spoke of sacrifice and heroism, but also of innovation and the willingness to challenge conventional wisdom in pursuit of greater understanding. "The Admiral wants to know if you'll consider returning to active duty," Vera said eventually. "Not to a ship assignment, to the Advanced Research Division, working on theoretical problems that could prevent future crises. He specifically requested that you head up the new electromagnetic navigation research group." Sarah stopped walking, her surprise evident. "Marcus Thorne wants me to return to the fleet? The same Marcus Thorne who dismissed my warnings and nearly court-martialed me for insubordination? The same Marcus Thorne who has spent the last 6 months publicly acknowledging his mistakes and working to ensure they never happen again." Vera confirmed. "He's changed. Sarah, the crisis forced all of us to confront some uncomfortable truths about institutional culture and the price of letting pride override prudent caution." The two women found a bench overlooking the Academy's main quadrangle, where hundreds of future officers moved between classes and study groups. The scene represented hope, a new generation of space explorers who would inherit the reforms born from tragedy and crisis, who would be trained to value innovation alongside tradition, who would understand that the greatest threats to their missions might come not from external dangers, but from internal resistance to necessary change. "I'll consider it," Sarah said finally, "but only if the position comes with genuine authority to challenge established procedures when the mathematics suggest better alternatives. I won't come back just to be a token representative of theoretical thinking while the real decisions are still made by people who value conformity over competence." "Done," Vera said immediately. "Admiral Santos has already signed off on departmental autonomy for the research division. You'd report directly to her, not through the traditional chain of command. And your recommendations would carry the same weight as any senior officer's operational assessments." As the sun set over the Academy grounds, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple, the two cousins discussed the future of deep space navigation and the challenges that lay ahead for humanity's expansion into the galaxy. The conversation ranged from technical details about electromagnetic field interactions to philosophical questions about the nature of exploration and discovery. "Grandmother would have loved this," Vera said eventually, touching the compass case at her side. The idea that ancient navigation wisdom and modern theoretical physics could work together to solve problems that seemed impossible. She always said that the universe had patterns within patterns, and that if you learned to listen to them, they would guide you safely home. She was right about more than navigation, Sarah said, her voice carrying across the evening air with quiet conviction. She understood that wisdom isn't about knowing all the answers. It's about knowing which questions to ask and having the courage to listen to the responses, even when they challenge everything you thought you knew. 3 years later, the transformation was complete. The Deep Space Fleet had evolved from a rigid hierarchy that valued conformity over competence into a dynamic organization that actively sought out diverse perspectives and innovative solutions. The Vera Chen Memorial Research Group had published 17 breakthrough papers on electromagnetic navigation, their work preventing no fewer than 12 potential ship losses across the fleet. The scholarship program had expanded to include theoretical research in multiple disciplines, creating pathways for brilliant minds that might otherwise have been overlooked or dismissed. Commander Vera Chen, now Captain Chen, the youngest officer in fleet history to command a deep space exploration vessel, stood on the bridge of the ISS Discovery, watching her diverse crew prepare for their mission to map the electromagnetic anomalies surrounding the Kepler 438 system. Her navigation officer was a young lieutenant whose theoretical work on quantum field interactions had been dismissed by his academy professors as too speculative for practical application. Her chief engineer was a woman whose innovative approaches to electromagnetic shielding had been rejected by 3 different research committees before finding support through the Chen Protocol's funding program. "Captain," Lieutenant Torres called. From the navigation station, "We're approaching the edge of the anomaly field. Electromagnetic readings are consistent with our theoretical models, but the field intensity is significantly higher than expected." Vera moved to stand behind the navigation console, her grandmother's compass warm against her chest. The antique instrument had become a symbol throughout the fleet, not of superstition or ancient wisdom, but of the importance of trusting your instincts while respecting the mathematical precision that governed the universe. "Run the calculations through the Vera Chen algorithms," she commanded. "I want 3 different approach vectors, each optimized for different field intensity scenarios. And Torres, don't let anyone tell you your models are too theoretical. Some of the best solutions come from mathematics that seems impossible until it proves itself under real conditions." The young officer's face lit up with the kind of confidence that came from working in an environment where innovation was valued over hierarchy, where brilliant ideas were judged on their merit rather than their source. It was the expression Vera had always hoped to see on her own face during those dark months aboard the Meridian, when every suggestion was questioned and every achievement minimized. Admiral Thorne appeared on the main viewscreen, his transmission reaching them from Earth Central Command, where he now served as Director of Leadership Development. The role suited him perfectly. His hard-won understanding of the dangers of institutional pride and the necessity of listening to challenging voices made him uniquely qualified to train the next generation of senior officers. "Captain Chen," he said, his voice carrying warmth that would have been unimaginable during their first encounters, "the fleet is watching your mission with great interest. The Kepler 438 anomalies represent exactly the kind of challenge that requires innovative thinking combined with careful execution. I have complete confidence in your ability to navigate these waters safely." The acknowledgement meant more than Vera could express, not because she needed the Admiral's approval for validation, but because it represented the complete transformation of an institutional culture that had nearly cost hundreds of lives through its resistance to change. The man who had once called her worthless had become one of her strongest advocates, not through political necessity, but through genuine recognition of the errors in his thinking. "Thank you, Admiral," she replied. "We'll make sure to document everything thoroughly. The navigation techniques we develop here could be applicable to similar anomalies throughout the galaxy." As the Discovery moved deeper into the electromagnetic maelstrom surrounding Kepler 438, Vera thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. The crisis that had nearly destroyed the Meridian had become the catalyst for changes that rippled through every aspect of the deep space fleet. Officers who might have been dismissed or marginalized under the old system were now commanding their own vessels, pursuing research that would have been considered too risky or unconventional, leading teams that reflected the diversity of human thought and experience. The patterns her grandmother had spoken of, patterns within patterns, rhythms in chaos, were everywhere once you learned to recognize them. They existed in the mathematics that governed electromagnetic fields and gravitational interactions, but also in the social dynamics that determined whether organizations adapted or stagnated, whether brilliant ideas were nurtured or suppressed, whether institutional change came through crisis or through wisdom. 6 hours later, the discovery emerged from the Kepler 438 anomaly field with complete sensor logs and 3 new navigation protocols that would make similar missions significantly safer for future exploration vessels. The mission was a technical success, but more importantly, it represented proof that the institutional changes sparked by the Meridian Crisis were not just temporary reforms but permanent evolution. As Captain Chen recorded her final mission log, she thought about all the officers who had come before her, the brilliant navigators whose ideas had been dismissed, the innovative thinkers who had resigned rather than fight against institutional resistance, the talented individuals who had been marginalized because they didn't fit traditional expectations of what a fleet officer should look like or think like. Their sacrifices had not been in vain. The fleet that emerged from the Meridian Crisis was stronger, more adaptable, more capable of facing the unknown challenges that awaited humanity among the stars. It was an organization that valued competence over conformity, innovation over tradition, and the courage to listen to uncomfortable truths over the comfort of familiar assumptions. The ghost that Admiral Thorne had tried so hard to ignore was no longer haunting anyone from the shadows. She had stepped into the light, taken her place among the fleet's most respected officers, and helped create an environment where future ghosts would be welcomed rather than feared, where brilliant minds would be nurtured rather than dismissed, where the patterns within patterns could be recognized and utilized to guide humanity safely through the vast, dangerous, beautiful universe that awaited their exploration. In the end, that was perhaps the most important navigation of all, not just finding safe passage through electromagnetic storms or gravitational anomalies, but charting a course toward a future where human potential could flourish without the artificial barriers of prejudice, pride, or institutional inertia. The stars wheeled in their eternal dance, indifferent to human struggles, but somehow comforting in their constancy. And somewhere among them, new challenges awaited, challenges that would require all the innovation, courage, and collaborative wisdom that the transformed fleet could muster. The ghost had become the guide, and the future belonged to those brave enough to trust in patterns others couldn't see.